Okay, so the recording's on. I think we'll get going. So look, thank you for joining us, coming out on a slightly sunny Bathurst winter Tuesday morning, which is an amazing thing to behold. Today's session is on using rubrics in the Turnitin Feedback Studio and looking at the difference between using the qualitative rubric, which is a default option used by most academics to date when marking in the Turnitin Feedback Studio, and using quantitative rubrics, which are becoming more popular quite quickly once people, I suppose, come to grips with what it can do and what it can't do. So we're going to have a look at the setup process for both, how they work in operation, and have a look at what that means for you, whether or not you want to use them or not. Keeping in mind, of course, that 12 months from now we'll be in another learning management system and doing all sorts of different training about how assessment is submitted anyway. So now that I've pulled the tablecloth out from under everyone, let's get on with looking at this one. So the first thing is I'm going to be referring to the Turnitin Quick Guide, which we provide on the DLT webpage about Turnitin. I'll drop it into the chat and at different times during the session today, because there are some links in there that also will be handy for you. Basically, the stuff on rubrics is on page, let's go with 4. I could be wrong again. Page 5, under the section Prepare Your Rubric Excel File, there is a link here to DOMS. And if we click on that, I can see we've got someone in the waiting room, which I'll just let in. If we click on that link, it's going to open a page over here. That's why I can't see it. There we go. Right, it opens this page up. And on that page, there are 3 different files available, 3 different rubric templates, Excel templates that we have to load into Turnitin when we set up an assignment. One is the basic template that people have been using for qualitative rubrics. And if I'm speaking French here, I'll just open one of those up and it looks like this. Let's drag that across. No, that looks like a pass fail. Oh, here we go. Okay, so it has a whole bunch of criterion columns that are ready for you to populate, and also our standard HD through to fail 5 columns. This is the basic template that people have been using in putting in the detail, criterion descriptors, etc., from the subject outlines into here before adding to Turnitin. But it also has a separate rubric for quantitative rubrics called a high-low rubric. And if we open that file up, the difference being that it has more columns in it, 2 columns specifically for each scales. So 2 for high distinction, 2 for distinction, 2 for credit, 2 for pass, 2 for fail, etc. And we'll come back to why we have this set up like this as we go through the setup process for quantitative rubrics. But that's the main difference between those 2 templates. Qualitative just has single column for each of the scale descriptors, and the quantitative high-low rubric gives you 2 columns for each scale. So I just need to move a few things out of the way so I can see the chat pod. As with most of the sessions I run, there's no set formality for these sessions. If you've got a question, drop it into the chat, and as soon as I see it, I'll respond, or just come off mute and pull me up, and we'll deal with those as we go. All right, so let's have a look at firstly setting up some qualitative rubrics inside Turnitin. This process is very straightforward. I have a section here in an I2 site that we're going to have a look at, where the process for setting up Turnitin, if you haven't gone through this before, is as long as you have your edit mode on, you can go to build content, Turnitin. We populate our assignment area. I'm going to do this fairly quickly. I'm not really dwelling on the marking in Turnitin aspect, mostly on rubrics today. So we'll call this assignment 1 test, and we might call this qualitative. And we'll say, okay, it's worth 20%. Don't worry about due dates, etc. Firstly, I'm going to then open up the optional settings and go down to the rubric section. You can see underneath the grammar spelling options, there's a box that says attach a rubric. And if I click on that, it then gives me the option of selecting from a drop-down if I've already created the rubric beforehand, or I've got to launch the rubric manager. So I'm going to launch the rubric manager. Now, by default, it opens up one of these sort of legacy rubrics that I'm certainly not going to be using, science arguments or something, but I'm going to be importing a rubric from one that I've created. So top right-hand corner, import export, I'm going to import, drag a rubric file in from my computer. So, I'll choose any rubric, this will do. Once it gets imported, I should get a tick. If you don't get a tick when you're importing that template, it's probably because your file name is too long or it has underscores in it. Turnitin is particularly fussy about naming conventions of its files. So just shorten the name. Make sure you don't have any underscores. Those are and make sure the rubric is named specifically enough that you're going to be able to find it in a list. So normally we kind of talk about the assignment number, the subject code, and identifying the text type, for example. So this one's got subject code, assignment number, and it's a critical appraisal. All right, now it's loaded, but for me to actually view it, I have to go back into the rubric manager. It's still not there. I've got to locate it in my list, top left-hand corner, and this will be alphabetized. So I need to find it. That thing was called APS something or other. APS, that'll do, critical appraisal right there. So now the rubric is loaded into the rubric manager. I want to draw your attention, if I can zoom this in, let's see if it gets bigger. Not really. Oh yeah. Down the bottom, we have 3 different options for choosing the type of rubric we're working with. By default, this 0 on the side here, which means 0 score or 0 marks allocated with this rubric, is in fact a qualitative rubric. And you'll see when you hover your mouse over it, there's a tooltip that says qualitative rubric. So here's my rubric that I've imported. That all looks fine to me. But if you need to make any changes, click in, and you'll see when you click on it, sometimes you get some of the coding messages sitting there. The students won't be able to see this, but you can see their page breaks and other things captured in the code. Don't worry too much about those. The students won't be able to see it. Before you can see the save option down here in the bottom right-hand corner, which is what I need to be able to start using the rubric, you have to make one change in here. This is part of Turnitin being fussy. One change, any change, even putting in a space in one of the cells, then click somewhere else. And now the save has highlighted, so I can save. I don't have a reason for why it does this, just Turnitin is really fussy. Hit save. And that rubric is now ready for me to use. So I can close the rubric manager, come back to my attach a rubric section and find, clicking on the drop down, the file that you've just saved will be at the very bottom of the list, always. So scroll right to the bottom and there it is, APS 404. There's my critical appraisal. Scroll to the bottom of my settings and turn it in here and submit. And my qualitative rubric is now attached to my assignment. Let's have a look at what it looks like when we mark in Turnitin. So I'm going to open the portal. I'll give me my inbox with all of my students, all hundreds of them. And I can actually go through the exercise of doing a faux grade, so to speak. You can do this yourself as well by clicking on grade next to the student's name. Do I want to grade without a submission? Yes, I do. It now creates an empty document called a grading template. Click on grade again. It's asking me about draft because it's before the due date. That's fine. I'm not going to keep it. And now it will open that blank submitted document along with over here on the right-hand side. So apart from being able to click within the document and do my normal kind of feedback, etc., you've got your summative comment area, but underneath that, we have our rubric options where the squares are. Once we click on these, we get the abridged view of the rubric. But if I click on these crosshairs up here, it will open it up in full screen for me. And there's my rubric, my qualitative rubric. It'll tell me it's a qualitative rubric down here in all of its glory. And the way this will work for your markers or yourself, if you're marking in here, is they'll come through and go, click on that, click on that, click on that, click on that. You're clicking on the criterion, and all it's doing is giving the student a visual indication of where their submission has fallen. That's all. Has no impact on the scoring. You've got to do all of that manually. Okay, so that's highlighted. It auto saves. There's no save button. So we can now close this, and we'll actually see in that abridged version that it has adjusted the slider here anyway, just as a visual confirmation that there has been something put into that rubric. All right, so that's now saved. Again, I'm going to have to manually put in the score up here when I'm ready to do so, but that rubric's now there and available. When the student gets their feedback, they'll be able to see the rubric scores as well. But again, it hasn't impacted on the scoring. Now, the way that some subjects approach this, and I'll get to your question in just a sec, Canis, is that they will say, well, that's okay as a beginning point for the students for feedback, but I need to give them more information. And so what they might end up doing, for example, is then adding in other information against some of the student submissions. And we'll have a look in here at what that looks like in some of the nursing subjects where they use qualitative rubrics. Okay, this is a session gone past. So apart from providing the rubric itself, they also will end up putting in a table to give more specific detail on how they came up with the scoring for the students, right? So they've used a tally table, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second, as well as the rubric itself. So you can see the rubrics there, but they actually want the student to see the detail within each of those criterion. And so they've done that not just by providing a text comment, but they've also utilized a tally table to drop in there and put scores in to show how they arrived at this number when they typed it in up the top. And I'll stop there and get to your question, Canis. You're muted, sorry.
Sorry. Yep. So after seeing your table, that you answer my questions. So actually in the rubric, you can only indicate which category in each criteria the student achieve. You can't actually give the actual marks.
In a qualitative rubric, you can't. In a quantitative, which I'm going to show you next, you can.
All right, okay, cool.
Right, so that's the choice that you end up making, yeah.
So the conclusion is you need to manually enter the 21 out of 40.
If you're using a qualitative rubric.
For you.
Yep, if you're using a qualitative rubric.
All right, okay, cool. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so how do we get a tally table into our comment area? That's pretty straightforward. I'll just find the one I was doing beforehand. Let's go with that one. Now, they've put that straight into their text comment area, which will take copying and pasting of basic text only. And the way that you get that table is you open a program like Outlook or Word, open a new document, for example, and create your table. So if I go in here and put insert table, and I'll say I want 2 columns, let's say I've got 6 criterion and a total or whatever, and then I can put my text in here, criterion 1, blah, 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 and then your total. And then this, you will then be able to paste directly into your feedback area. So if you're going to use a tally table, just have that ready. Maybe you've sent it in an email to your markers, for example, and they can just copy and paste that each time and then populate that, as well as doing the text that they want to have afterwards. They're commenting, etc. as well. So it's pretty easy to get that in there, keeping in mind that at the end of it, you're still going to have to type manually the scoring up the top before it flows through to the grade center. And we have a question. Yep. No, we don't. Gone. Okay.
I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, there you are. So that's okay.
I found the unmute. So what you're saying is each time you want to use this tally table, you've got to import it, cut and paste every single time. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. If you have it ready in another document or your markers do, for example, then it'll be in the clipboard and you'll just hit Control V to paste it each time into the text, but there's no way to pre-populate it into all of the documents, which I think is what you're asking as well. Yeah, it's got to be pasted in each time. All right. So that's qualitative in a nutshell. And by far and away, that's the way that most people have been using the Feedback Studio rubrics. Probably because it's the easiest to do in terms of setup. Let's have a look at quantitative. And I'm going to close a few tabs in the background and have a look at how quantitative works. So we can close Ruth's one here. So we created in my site a qualitative rubric. I'm going to actually go back now and create a second one just to use for quantitative. So I might actually end up attaching it even to the same one. So I'll change the name here for a sec. Instead of qualitative, we're going to make a quantitative rubric. I might up the scoring a little bit. We'll say this one's worth 40. Go in again. And this time round, remembering that the high-low rubric that I was showing you before, the empty template, I'm going to import one that already has some data in there. So if I can find a quant high-low rubric, let's have a look. That looks pretty good. There's a legal memo. Let's have a look at that. Did it open it?
We can't see it, Lachlan.
Yeah, it's coming. All right, so here we go. So here is a rubric for a subject where they have populated all 10 of those columns, keeping in mind, don't worry too much about the text that's in the descriptors. What they've done is just duplicate the information for both the high and the low in that rubric. So there isn't different information between the high and the low. They've literally copied the whole column and pasted it into the next one. So high and low within high distinction has the same information, but it's going to give you the ability to allocate 2 different scores when you're using a quantitative rubric. So I'm going to use this one in just a second, and I'll show you how that operates. So if we go to our Turnitin portal and go to our settings, this time round, when we launch the rubric manager again, I'm going to import that quantitative rubric that we were just looking at. I get my tick, Law 309A2, legal memo. Okay, now I can go back, locate it from my menu. Law, LLL 309, quantitative memo. That looks pretty good. Now, I'll open this up. By default, again, it's selected qualitative. When we first come in, I can see someone's in the waiting room. Okay. I need to switch this over, and I've got 2 options for quantitative rubrics. One of them is a custom rubric, and a custom rubric means that you have to define, see all the zeros that are here? It means that you need to define the value for each of these cells. Now, the way this works is that you have to decide the maximum in the first high distinction column must always be full marks that are possible for this. You're not allowed to go lower than that, otherwise the scoring won't work properly. So if you remember that we were saying this task was worth 40, if I turned around and said each of these criteria is worth 10 marks, for example, and I can put in here 10, 10, 10, and 10, because the first column for high distinction must be the maximum possible score for that particular criterion. So I'm assuming at this point that you've already established how much you want each of these to be worth marks-wise for your criterion. Now you have to put in the values for each of the other cells that go in here. So for example, if we were saying that HD is 85 to 100. So if we said that that was 9, that was, let's see, 8.2, 7.6, let's see, credit high. So that'd be 7.2, something like that. These are not arbitrary scores. You can put in whatever value you like here, but I'm trying to fall within the percentage amount there. 6.6, 6.2, and then a pass. We'll go 6 point whatever, 6.0. Oh no, that's a low pass. So 5, for example, and then close might be 4.5, and then a clear fail, whether or not you give them 0 or part marks or whatever, this is up to you. And you're going to need to repeat this process for each of these cells. Now, I'm not going to populate the whole thing, but I will do it enough so that we can see how this process works when we score. And while I'm doing that, I can see I've got another question. If you want to go ahead, I'll just keep typing in the background.
Yeah, you know how you said you've got to have the highest HD, you've got to have 10 there.
It's got to be maximum in the first column.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. But with the high credit, you don't have to have the highest mark for the credit.
That's right. No.
Okay.
All of the others can be whatever you want them to be, but the first column must be maximum. Otherwise, the mechanism it uses to collate the grade won't work. That's the reason that's the case. All right, so I've put enough information into a few cells for us to use this now. If I click on save, we can use this rubric now. We might give it a slightly different name so that I can find it easy enough when I go to populate. So that rubric's ready to be used. If I go back into my options for my assignment, from the drop-down, remembering the most recent thing I worked on in theory should be in here. There it is, right at the bottom, but it's not called XY. Why is it not called XY? Anyway, we'll give that a crack. The reason you're getting this prompt about a message is because I already started marking another student's assignment beforehand when we were looking. That's why that red prompt is up there. I'm going to attach a different rubric and submit. And now I can go through that same faux grading exercise that we did before to see how the quantitative rubric operates. So if I go back in here, grade without a submission, and bring up our rubric tool, what I can see already is a prompt up here giving me a score. So that tells me the quantitative rubric has been attached, but I'm going to open it up full screen. And you can see those values are there visible for me. So now the process is simply click, 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 and click. And even as I've done that, down in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see the tally has been collated down here. And I can apply that to the grade and close. And the score has already gone up the top and flowed through to the grade center. Now you will notice, even though the total in here for the task was 29.8, it is rounded up, and that's because Turnitin ultimately, when it sends the final grade through, only deals in whole numbers. It will round up that value. So you can use 2 decimal points within your rubric when you create it, but ultimately it will round the value up in Turnitin and send it through. Now, a couple of comments here as well. The value that you have for your quantitative rubric can be whatever you want it to be. And what I mean by that is you can create a rubric out of 100 and it will convert, when you click on apply to grade, it will convert the value for the rubric into the weighting for the task. So what that means is for subjects like the nursing subjects where they're marking out of 100 in their rubrics, when you click on apply to grade, it will convert that automatically into the weighting that you've set up for the task. It'll do the conversion for you and send that value through to the grade center. And we've got another question.
See how you've got the bars there for criteria 1, criteria 2, because you populated from that rubric. Can you further adjust them by moving those dots?
100%. Yep.
Okay.
So I
that
can,
will, and
I
will
can
that
shift them.
be reflected on the rubric too?
It will shift it. As you can see, that's changing there. But until I click on apply to apply to grade, it won't change this value up the top.
Right, but will it change the rubric what that they see?
Yes, it is changing the rubric. Yep. So when I click on apply to grade as well, or I can open this. So this is 6.2. We'll change it to 7.6.
You might have a second thought and go, oh, and then change it on the bar.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah. So see how it's 7.6 now. So it has shifted it. Yep. The apply to grade is the conversion to the final score that then flows through to the grade center after that. Canis, you've got a question.
Hi, morning. I'm very new to CSU, but I'm very familiar with Turnitin in my last universities, right? So I just want to check, as I never heard of those qualitative version. So basically, the quantitative is, if we can say, a bit more a higher level of the setup. So basically, the quantitative is the same as the qualitative, right? Because the quantitative give you, more, I would say, easier way for the markers. When you click, and then the marks will be applied automatically. And then you don't need to cut and paste the tally table, isn't it? Because I never heard of those qualitative. So, but for the quantitative, 100%, you have more work doing the setup. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's right. I think the main issue is that the quantitative restricts you as a marker in terms of how you apply the scoring within a criteria for each criterion, for example. So what that means is that if you want to give anywhere between, like if we're looking at that rubric, let me open up that rubric again. If I said that I wanted the ability to be able to apply for each criterion a score somewhere between 85 and 100, whether 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, any of those, I can't do that in a quantitative rubric. I have to have one value for the cell, one value only. And that's why we have the template, the high-low template and I've created 2 columns for it. So at least it gives you 2 different values to differentiate between the maximum and a lower value for each of those scales. But a lot of academics want full control over how they distribute the scoring for each criterion. Another way of referring to it is grading within a range. So I want to be able to go 85, 86, 86.5, 87. And hence, in the quantitative rubric tool in Turnitin, it doesn't give you that flexibility unless you literally create a new column for every possible score you want to be able to allocate. So,
okay. So do you mind if I clarify? So in each grading, like, the high distinction, and credit, can you have more than 2 columns?
absolutely.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Good. Okay.
Again,
so
it comes back to that
10,
earlier point about
9.5 and then 9 for
Yeah.
high distinctions. So you can have as many columns as you want when you do the setup.
Absolutely. So from
Okay.
that high-low template that we looked at before, you can add as many additional columns as you like, and it will allow you to have additional scores. Absolutely.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So again, it comes down to how much time you want to put into the setup for these. Once you have them, and then you can then reuse them, obviously, in subsequent sessions and things. But I want to talk a little bit about the difference between the custom rubric option that we were looking at, where we determined the score for each cell, versus the final option, which is called a standard rubric. Again, this is a quantitative rubric, but this time around, when we click on it, what you'll see is it asks you to determine one single value for the entire column, but you have to determine the weighting on the left-hand side for each criterion. Now, some people prefer to work like this if they're thinking, well, criterion 1 is worth 40% for the task and criterion 2 is worth, 10, 5, whatever, all adding up to 100. And then you can say, for example, that each of these is worth 100. It's going to be done out of 100, for example. I can do that and determine the weighting. But instead of you having figured out already what the marks are going to be for each cell, you're simply putting in, why did I put in 100 for each of these? Sorry, let me wind the tape back just slightly. The first column needs to be 100. Then we work our way down. So if we said, for example, the next one was 85, 80, 75, for example. Credit high, 72, 65, and so on and so forth, a high pass, and then a low pass, a close fail, and then a clear fail. I can leave a 0, for example. And then I might say the first criterion is actually worth 40% of the whole thing. The second one's worth 20, whoops, and 10. So you can see now it's telling me down the bottom here, the total's only 90. Okay, I haven't done that very well. How about now? The total's worth 100% for the task. Fantastic. I can now save this memo. Doesn't have a valid point value. Which one? Which one doesn't have a valid point value? How about the final one? Because I only put in 0. Maybe that's it. Okay, let's try that and see if it fixes it. That's better. Okay, it does actually want a score of some description in that final column when using the standard quantitative rubric. Let's have a look at how this actually behaves now when we apply it to the assignment that we've been looking at. Close this and close that. I just got to get back to my class list. That's not it. Ever have that problem where you've got too many windows open? I think I'm living that dream. Okay, here we go. So here's my inbox in my Turnitin portal. So I'm going to go back to my settings, top right-hand corner, open up my optional settings, scroll down to where the rubrics are. And now when I hit my drop down, I should be able to find my latest one. There it is. Quantitative XY. And now I'll attach that rubric and see how the weighted standard quantitative rubric behaves. Saved it. Now I can go back and we'll go through the marking process again. This time around, if I grade, open up the rubric tool, and you'll see this time it's giving me a value out of 100 for the task. And if I open this up and I apply some different values and apply to grade, you'll see that it's tallied them down the bottom, 78.8, apply to grade. And I can then click on, oh, it's already applied it up the top here. So we've got 32 out of 40. So that's the difference essentially, is whether or not you are determining the individual criterion cell values, which, to be honest, most people that use a quantitative rubric will use the custom rubric and have those values already in mind and put those in. Or if you want to actually have the weighting for each of the criterion and a single column across the top. Really depends how you've approached setting your rubric up. A lot of people already have this in mind, even when they've done their subject outline, how they're going to be marking the assignment. So if you haven't done it in advance where you've got the weighting already established in your head, then you're going to be putting in those individual custom values using a custom quantitative rubric. The feedback that I've had using the custom quantitative rubric is that it is incredibly powerful, time saving. The markers love it. particularly if they've got large marking teams, etc. They can concentrate on the feedback. It's just the setup. The setup is the thing. You've got to have put the time into the rubric with its 10 columns, assuming you're using your high and low values, etc. Have that ready and in place. But once it's there, the marking process and the calculation of the scores, the conversion time that you would put in there, all of that stuff is all very, very quick. So I'm going to stop there in a second and see what people have to say. What are our thoughts on this? Does this hold any appeal to you, Brendan? What do you think?
Yeah, look, it's not bad. From our experience, we like marking across the rubric, and I see limitations in the qualitative to be able to do that. For example, if we've got different options in the criterion, like not just the one criterion, and they've maybe done really well in the first part of the criterion but failed the other part, and then in turn that impacts then the individual scoring. So if we're scoring it between, say, 1 and 10, at the moment with this, you can only either give a 10 or the nominated, say, like a 5. You know what I mean? You can't, unless you do individual tables, obviously 10 tables then, which would be a bit extreme for one criterion. So
absolutely, yeah.
I say I suppose it's good and bad. I do see the advantage of it though from a marking perspective, because it'd be great if you could just click it all and then not, and just, like you said, focus on that feedback. But I feel like it's still just not there.
Yeah, I hear you. Obviously, in a perfect world, we want to be able to have something like this that allows us to grade within the scale and allocate our increments and have it calculate. And I'm hopeful that we will be able to do that in Brightspace when we start using their rubric tool as well. But from what I've seen so far, it's quite similar in terms of the Turnitin setup and its limitation as well. So yeah, as an interim measure, again, it comes down to whether or not you're happy working within a single value, 2 values within each criterion, 3, 4. I have seen academics that have set up 5 columns per criterion scale. So 25 columns worth of cell descriptors and things, which is just starting to make me think, oh, that hurts just thinking about it. But also, how meaningful is it to the student when they get it and they have to scroll across indefinitely to see the criterion scores and things? But yeah, we've got another question.
So I understand the conversation so far, but with those bars that you can move up and down, can't you then adjust so it can give you that in between? Like if you had, let's say, you know how you said you have to have 100 for the first one. If you feel that first, you just drag it down and you amend it there.
Yeah, so you can amend it, but you'll see that the increments that it's working in are actually just the 10 columns.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That are in your rubric. Yeah, so it's not giving you kind of more flexibility within that scale. It's simply giving you the highest value, which we have, which is 100, all the way down to the lowest, which was the clear fail, which is so it's, yeah, unfortunately, it's not letting you kind of work more flexibly within that. All it's doing is just shifting the cell on that criterion down to the, you know, any that you've already established. So there's 10 options because we had 10 columns.
I came from Newtas and they used that. What is it? Is it, what did you call it? The new system?
Oh, Brightspace. Yep.
Yeah. And we could amend it in between. It was really good. You could give them any score within that. So that was good. But I still think this is it's better than the qualitative one. I think this makes it easier.
Yeah, and look, the other question I get quite often is about the grade distribution and whether this has a big impact on papers that are graded like this versus qualitative, and if it disadvantages students, for example, in any way, if they're not able to have enough of a clear spread between different student grades, etc. And all of the testing that we've done with hundreds of papers really is that, for lack of a better term, it all comes out in the wash. The distribution still seems to be the same, but it really comes down to whether or not how substantial the rubric is. how many criterion, how the weighting's been done and the scoring, etc. If you've only got 2 criterion, for example, in the task, then it's not really going to give you the ability to spread those marks significantly over the cohort. You need, I would probably be steering for 4 and above, as a standard, but that's not particular to use of the qualitative or quantitative rubrics. For the rubric to be meaningful in the first place, you probably do want it to have a number of different distinct criterion. But anyway, this workshop isn't about how we set up the quality of a rubric, so to speak. It's more about this mechanism. Any other comments, questions, feedback, etc. on any of this? I'm curious to hear people's issues on this. Val.
I've got a question for the end because it doesn't relate exactly to this. It just relates to glitches that someone sent to me to solve. Okay.
So by all means, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to hear it now or later.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, basically, this casual academic marked the wrong assignment. So the student had resubmitted before the due date, sent an email with a warning, please mark this assignment. But unfortunately, the marker marked the first one and the student failed, and that was entered through Turnitin. Now, the marker wants to go back and pass the student, but he doesn't know how, and neither do I.
Can't change the score, you mean?
Within Turnitin? It's already gone through the system and been logged into everything.
Okay, and it's gone past SAC and all the rest of it, like we're past the time?
No, yes, it's gone through SAC, I think.
Okay, so I guess the thing is the relationship between Turnitin and the Grade Center is monodirectional. So what you put in Turnitin will flow through to the Grade Center, but you can always amend what is in the Grade Center directly, irrespective of what's in Turnitin. So you can go in and click on the cell inside the Grade Center. As long as you can edit the Grade Center, which means if it's been locked, for example, you might need to get it unlocked, but you can certainly amend the grade in the Grade Center. Don't worry about the Turnitin score up the top, and what's in the Grade Center won't flow back in the other direction either. It's a one-time transaction from Turnitin through to the Grade Center.
So in a current subject, he's also added up incorrectly. So he's obviously using qualitative.
Qualitative, yeah.
And entered the wrong mark. So he changes that in Grade Center as well.
That's right.
Okay, great. Thanks.
No problem. Candice?
If we get stuck, anywhere we can get support for this, please.
So that'll be with DLT. You'd log a service request through the DLT service portal. And if any of the learning resource officers are not able to help you with your particular problem, I can guarantee they'll end up contacting me and I'll be able to help you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
No problem. Brendan.
Can you just show us how you did the how you had Ruth Crawford, how you just put it in like so you could manually go into it again? Just
oh right, the manual the faux grading, you mean?
Yeah, the faux grading. Yeah, that was good.
Okay, sure. I don't even know if that's a thing, by the way, that term. I just
you should made it up. I like it. You should keep it.
All right, so we'll look at one of the others. For example, when you've got no submissions in there, you can still click on grade and it prompts you to do grading without a submission, and it creates a grading template. So that's the term that comes up, which is literally a blank document that you can then click on grade and start playing with it. And you'll see the blank document. The prompt that you get is before the due date, if it's before the due date, for example.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll get past the due date and a student hasn't submitted something, or they've sent it to you privately or whatever. You could still use this technically to provide feedback to the student, if that was the case. But yeah, you'll see that it's.
I'm just thinking aloud, just from a moderation perspective.
Sure.
So potentially each marker could go into the person's paper, look at the comments. Like if we all generically put in comments as we're doing it, and then each of us put in a table there as well. In theory, that could be a way of moderating a document.
Absolutely. You can, anyone with full staff or instructor access in the subject site will be able to come in here, see the dashboard and go into the papers, whether they've got a score or a mark or not, and add other content to that.
Yeah.
The point being that if it's past the feedback release date, the student's going to be able to see that.
Oh no, before it goes back to the students.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. In that case, yep, then they can all come in and then add things subsequently into that same area.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I like it. I like it.
I will put in, keep in mind that even when we remove these faux submissions, which you would do before the student submits anything, the Grade Center has still lodged this as a submission attempt. And if I actually bring up the Grade Center for this page, we'll have a look. You'll see there the submission attempts for the students are logged in there. So even when I've removed them from Turnitin, it won't remove them from here. You've got to manually do that. So that's a faux submission. There's nothing in there. This was one of the ones we did with a quantitative rubric. And the way to get rid of those is to view the grade detail and clear the grade. Once we click on clear grade, we can go back into the Grade Center and that will now be gone. And I can do the same with this score. And you'll see that those have now disappeared. Those Turnitin questions. Okay. Candice, have you got another question?
Sorry. So the document you just showed us at the very beginning, do you think we can have a copy, please?
100%. I can
Yeah,
give you
thank you.
one in the chat now while we're talking in Zoom, and you can download it from here. Otherwise, you can also get it from the DLT page on Turnitin, which I'll just find. It's, let's see, I want to say it'd be under learning technology, but it could be hiding somewhere else.
No, that's okay. I got the copy. Thank you.
You got the copy? Okay, great. I will find that link. Okay, any other comments, questions? Otherwise, we can have a bit of an early mark. As I said, if you have any questions about this with your setup, by all means, log an SRS request and some of the DLT staff will be able to support you, whether it's myself or some of the LROs. Otherwise, happy rubricing. I will make one final comment just while it occurred to me, is that if you have taken the time to populate your rubric before session, I know we've kind of, that horse is bolted for 60, but in future, if you've already got your rubric into the Excel template in advance, you can upload this directly into the subject outline tool for your assignment rubrics. You don't have to use the subject outline tool, horrible table tool that does all the weird things with the formatting sometimes of adding in columns and messing with the formatting and things. You can actually literally copy and paste the cells from your Turnitin Excel rubric into the subject outline tool and it appears beautifully. So that might save you some time in future as well. Okay, thanks everybody. Happy Tuesday and we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you.